let's talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. And hypothetically, if I was to give you a final exam, which you're not going to have a written exam, are you? But if you were, and I put on the question on this exam, the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery in the United States, would you say yes or no? Is that true or false? If you put true, then I'm sorry to say you got a 0 on that question, because the Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery in the United States. The 13th Amendment did. The Emancipation Proclamation is a lot more complex than that, as history is, and we need to spend some time to dive into what that means. So, if by 1862, things changed drastically for President Lincoln and his administration and the direction of the war. The primary objective of Lincoln and his government, his Republican government, was that to bring the southern states back into the fold of the United States at all cost, really. If you could arguably say that he would have given up anti-slavery notions if it meant to bring the South that was seceded from the Union back into the Union, back into the United States. Now, I say that, but also at the same time, you have people who are very strong abolitionists in his party, and they saw this growing war and amplified war that was lasting a heck of a lot longer than both sides anticipated, and bloodier than both sides anticipated, saw this as an opportunity of changing the direction and making it a war to end slavery. And that starts to really gain motion and traction by 1862. Now, a thing that's really important to keep in mind is that anti-slavery and abolitionism are not the same thing. So if I put on this hypothetical exam, abolitionism and anti-slavery, is that the same thing? You would have to put false to get that right, because it's not. By the time of Lincoln, it was very, very different. The politics around anti-slavery and the politics around abolitionism are incredibly different. So anti-slavery during the time of Lincoln politically meant not the abolition of slavery in the South. Remember, this is such a strong institution and the foundation of the economy, and that economy is tied to the whole country. So it wasn't about the abolition of slavery in the South, but it was about stopping slavery as the country moved west. So as territories grew west, California and Oklahoma, Oregon, these states, the idea is to stop anti-slavery so that those states, those territories west, don't become slave states. The idea, too, is, some of the richest people in the country are the slave-holding plantation owners. And with territories opening up, being able to buy land, they did not want the southern rich aristocracy, slave-owning area people to buy those regions and make those plantations. It would push out the smaller farmers. It would push out the white farmers who are moving west, who they're encouraging to create small holdings, right? And think of the Whiskey Rebellion, think of Shays' Rebellion. Those were all small white farmers, yeomen. And the idea that if those become slave states, they're going to push out the small farmers, and the big industries, the big corporations, if you will, of slave-holding plantations, those are the ones that are going to have the monopoly and control. So it's not so much about ending the system, as even though there are people of anti-slavery notion, especially in the Republican Party at this time, that are abolitionists. But politically, the first step is to stop the spread of slavery and then look at ending slavery. And ending slavery as an institution, that's abolitionism. It's the abolishment of the system. Anti-slavery is stopping its spread. Think of it, I guess the best term for today is like cancer. If slavery is a cancer of the society of the United States, you either try to cut it off and kill it, but at first you don't want it to spread. You don't want it to spread further in your body. And that's the direction a lot of these anti-slavery sentiment went first, is stop the spread first, make sure it doesn't spread further, and then look at killing the source, the institution of slavery. Does that make sense? So that is what the platform of Lincoln stood on. And that's what started the South to secede, because they saw that coming. They saw what was happening. They saw that, hey, you're trying to stop our institution, our foundation of the economy from moving west. That's just the first stage. And in fact, it definitely was. So by 1862, and Lincoln and his cabinet administration, understanding that the South was not coming back in anytime soon, that the war is getting bloodier, they could go right from stopping anti-slavery, really, to going right into abolitionism and having this war end slavery. There is a problem with this, though. That's an important caveat. That there were 4 states along the border of the Mason-Dixon line. If you look at this map that I'm going to put up here, this map shows and on blue, those are the states that remained in the Union. Those are the North. The red are the ones that there became the Confederate States of America. And then the orange ones, those become slave states after the firing of Fort Sumter. So they were kind of holding on the line. They did not want to break from the Union. But when war broke out, they had to choose, who are they fighting with? Whose side are they going to fight? Are they going to remain in the Union, or are they going to be part of the southern states? And after the fire in Fort Sumter in 1861, they joined the South. Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas. They become part of the southern states. And that's why General Lee from Virginia had to make the decision to control and to run the army under Lincoln in the North, or join the South of his state in Virginia. And he chose the South. So Robert E. Lee joins the South after Fort Sumter. Now, those light blue states, Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Maryland. And Maryland, if you think about where Washington, D.C. is, that is not a state you want to go to the South. But those 4 states, interestingly, are slave-holding states. But they did not secede to the South. They are part of the Union. But they are slave-holding states. A lot of people don't realize that there were those 4 states, part of the Union, fighting against the South, that were slave-holding states. So what does that mean for the Emancipation Proclamation? Well, when Lincoln did not intend to abolish slavery when the war began, but as the situation rapidly changed and enslaved people in the South, whose owners were waging war to make sure slavery endured, to make sure that was part of the system in this new country that they developed, Lincoln had to sort of end that. One is to end it by having Europe, who's looking at the situation in the United States of whose side to give supplies to. Think about England and France. They have abolished slavery. So they're going to go more readily, more probably, to the side that's against slavery. So it helps for foreign presence for Lincoln to look at ending slavery, or at least have some sort of stand of ending slavery. And that's going to be good for foreign interests and looking at that. But however, they also are interested in the tobacco. They're interested in the cotton, and their own economies are tied to the Southern economy. Whether they like slavery or not, their economy is tied to a slave economy. So it becomes tricky that way. However, President Lincoln looks at the North changing this direction to become an abolitionist type thing. However, going back again, this is where it gets complicated. He cannot have Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Maryland go to the South. If he said, we're going to abolish all slavery in the country, then what would happen? Those institutions of slavery in those states would be threatened, and they would for sure join the South. What would that mean with Maryland? Have you been to Washington, D.C.? We have Virginia and Maryland, and between the two is the District of Columbia, where Washington, D.C. is. And if Maryland went to the South, Washington, D.C. would be completely surrounded by southern states. The Army, Maryland being the one protecting Washington, D.C., would now have to fight with the South, and the war would be lost. So he was very careful with the Emancipation Proclamation to not free the slaves in those southern territories. That's a very important thing. Lincoln wrote the draft while staying in his sort of summer home, a place called the Soldier's Cottage, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. And he came back on July 22nd, 1862, to sort of present this to his cabinet. And the secretary, his name was Edward Stanton, suggested that they wait for a big military victory to issue the proclamation. That would sort of solidify their strength and their power, and then sort of making a stand that this is what we're doing and this is how it is. So unfortunately, it took a while for that big victory. And it wasn't until September 17th, 1862, at the Battle of Antietam-Sharpsburg. Antietam. So in the north, they named the battles after the nearest river, or stream, and the stream was named Antietam. And the nearest town, this is what the South named this battles after. So for the north, it was the Battle of Antietam. For the South, it's remembered as the Battle of Sharpsburg. So depending on, where you learn the history, it's the same battle. But that battle on September 17th, 1862, though bloody on both sides, was seen as a victory of the North. And that was the go-ahead to now issue this Emancipation Proclamation. But he made sure in this document that he was not freeing those slaves. The wording was clear. Lincoln specified that the enslaved people would only be freed in states which were, quote, in rebellion against the United States. If they were in rebellion against the United States. He did not say that those in the different country, the Confederate States of the Union, those were, in his view, in his mind, and the legal document, those were still part of the United States, but they were in rebellion. That's huge. And he also said that he gave a chance by January 1st, 1863. So by the beginning of the year, though, they have a chance to come back into the Union and prevent the proclamation from going into effect. So what did this mean? Well, if you think about it, the Emancipation Proclamation changed the war from the soldiers trying to just bring the country back together to now being an army of liberation. The enslaved people in the South, in the deep South, in the states that were fully entrenched in the war, not on the border, right? They were still enslaved until 1865. But those in the slave states, they learned about the proclamation. There was newspapers, right? You think about the Northern abolition newspapers. They were bombarding, putting them in there, making sure that the slaves of the South knew about the Emancipation Proclamation, and therefore they took an active role in freeing themselves from bondage, knowing that their action of freeing themselves would then have the support of a full United States Army to defend them. So black men were accepted into the army to play their own part in ending the war. And in 1863, those become some of the bloodiest battles. Those all-black units, the 54th Massachusetts and other ones, fighting some of the bloodiest battles, and segregation in the army and kind of on the front lines. But it was a fight for their freedom. It was a fight for the freedom of other black men and women in the South. And this was now a liberation army of that, a new cause and a new direction. The Emancipation Proclamation promised the United States being committed to ending slavery. It transformed the idea that, this is not just ending anti-slavery notion, but it is the beginning process of abolitionism. And before even the war ends, that comes into effect. So finally, it promises the Confederacy that there's no turning back the clock. They have done it. They've seceded from the Union, and therefore their institution of economics, the slavery system, is no longer going to be in effect, and it's going to change everything. And this is an important thing as we get into the next section I want to talk about briefly, but what this war and the end of the war meant for everybody and for different people, and how that transforms identities.